trying to get started. We didn't have any money. We were trying to pool together the money to buy this first MOQ. Probably tried to pitch this thing to over 100 people, and it just never really landed with anybody. No love, couldn't get $1 from anybody.
Welcome to Eating Glass. It's a podcast where in each episode, we ask startup founders the questions no one else will. Our goal? To reveal what it's actually like to start, scale, and exit a company. I'm Joe LeMay, and I bootstrapped my reusable notebook company, Rocketbook, to a $50 million exit.
And I am Will Nitze, founder and CEO at IQ a nutrition company I took from 0 to 40 plus million in annual revenue. For better or worse, we are your hosts. Eating Glass is sponsored by IQ which is my company, so be nice to it. What do we do here? We make IQ plant protein bars, IQ Mix hydration mixes, and IQ Joe instant mushroom coffees, all of which are special because they are the only thing in their category that centers on nutrients good for your body, protein, electrolytes, things like that, as well as things that are good for your brain, so magnesium or lion's mane, to name a few. They are all delicious. Most functional foods and drinks taste like crap. Ours taste good, and taste matters. That is despite them being super low in sugar and super clean label. There's no weird stuff on our labels. And by the way, they're affordable. Functional stuff is usually price gougy, and we are not. I will not be offering a discount code. I will instead ask you a favor. Go to Amazon.com, search for IQ Bar, IQ Mix, IQ Joe, or some combination of the three. Find a non-sponsored listing, click on it, buy it, wait for it to arrive, and leave a review. And that is the only favor I will ever ask you. Thank you very much. Eating Glass is also sponsored by Ramp. Ramp is a corporate card and spend management software that we at IQ have used for 5 years now, I think. And I actually reached out to them about sponsoring, not the other way around. I love them for 3 reasons. Number one, simplicity. Everyone on our team gets a physical and a digital card. Replacing cards, pausing cards, putting limits on cards, insanely easy. Setup takes 10 minutes. Number two, cash back. 1.5% cash back. You don't have to deal with points. If you're messing around with points, you are wasting your time. Just get cash back. Number three, they are better at categorizing spend. So we not only save money on the cashback side, we save time on closing our books because they're just better at classifying. They give us an incredible offer for you guys, $250 free when you sign up for Ramp today. Go to ramp.com/glass. That's ramp.com/glass. Cards are issued by Sutton Bank and Celtic Bank, members FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. Final sponsor is Gorgias, Gorgias. This is the help desk / customer service app we use at IQ We've used it for years. Similar situation, I reached out to them about sponsoring, and we actually started on Zendesk and moved to Gorgias. Our customer service had forced us to, basically, and I was like, why did you force us to do that? Why is Gorgias so much better? And he said, number one, apps and integrations are just better. We have a customer base on Shopify, Amazon. We want to be able to take phone calls. Like, all of that filters into one dashboard, and it makes his life easier. His user experience is easier. There's less clicking, less typing. Because of all the automations inherent to the Gorgias platform, he just has to do less, click less, have less tabs open. And the final thing is, it's really good for consumer brands. So returns, refunds, things that are centric to a business like mine are made really, really easy via the Gorgias platform. Go to gorgias.com. Again, that's Gorgias. Request a free trial. Mention us, Eating Glass. You will get preferential treatment, and you'll be up and running in 15 days. Boom. Sean Riley coming in hot from his lake house in, where are you at again?
Southern Illinois.
Southern Illinois. Beautiful. Yep. Southern Illinois. Cool. So a little bit of background. Sean and I know each other. Joe and Sean just met, but everyone knows Dude Wipes. It's an iconic brand. Everyone's come across it in some way, shape, or form. Regardless of that, you want to just tell everyone about yourself, Sean, a little bit of background about yourself, and then what is Dude Wipes?
Sure. Yeah. So Sean Riley, Chief Executive Dude of Dude Wipes. And, we kind of started our company as a better way to take a shit. And back in the day, we were a bunch of dudes in like an Animal House style thing after college, eating burritos, drinking beers, taking big nasty shits. And we would use these baby wipes, and like they weren't cutting it. You weren't even supposed to flush them. So that was our aha moment of like, well, why don't we make a brand, that's talks like guys actually talk, like people actually talk. Why don't we make a cool product? Why don't we start a company? So that entrepreneurial spirit, was always there. And, just kind of looking for a way to get out of the 9 to 5. And, our first year of sales was like in 2012, but that was, bringing them out of the apartment to UPS. I think we made like $10,000 that year. So yeah, just kind of scrappy, no idea what we're doing. First time entrepreneurs, beginnings, and, slowly but surely started figuring out the game. And, fast forward over 10 years later and, built the brand up where a lot of people hopefully recognize it. Still have a long way to go. There's a lot of people who don't know Dude Wipes as well. And last year we did over 150 million in sales. So we're just cranking along and having fun while we're doing it, trying to stay true to the Dude Wipes brand.
It's funny. I listened to a couple of interviews of you in preparation for this. Every single time you mentioned burritos, you're always like, we were just crushing burritos and taking gnarly shits.
Yeah.
I just thought that was so funny. It made me think of like you doing a partnership with like Chipotle or something like that. Because it was like burrito, beer, burrito.
Well, that's because there was a late night Mexican place right by the apartment. So every night, guys would get blitzed and they would stop there for a burrito before they got home at like 2 a.m. and bring it back to the apartment. So it was actually what was happening. We were pounding burritos at that place. People have always kind of gravitated towards that part of the story as well. Like it's fun, it's realistic, and it's on our packaging. When we talk about our story, we say we were guys eating burritos,
I'm imagining you workshops your PR origin story over, as we all do, right? We all have like the actual story of how it happened when you actually have 20 minutes to tell the story. Then you've got like the 30-second story as well, right? That you workshop for a little imagery in there.
Yeah.
But I'm curious too, like what are some parts of your origin story that, maybe before this groundbreaking podcast, you never really shared because it's just part of the twists and turns?
Trying to get started, we didn't have really any money. So we're trying to pool together the money to buy this first MOQ. And at the same time, we were trying to like pitch to local investors a lot. Probably tried to pitch this thing to over 100 people, and it just never really landed with anybody. Sounds like a simple idea, right? But the whole thing, I guess, wasn't believable. There was even sentiment of like, well, guys will never use wipes, that's far-fetched, right? And we're like, no, like we're just some regular dudes. We're using wipes. We don't think we're that special, no love, couldn't get $1 from anybody, which is why we ended up doing like, the bootstrapped way.
There's like a common theme of, I think after the fact, you say, oh, I'm so glad I did it this way and that way and that way. And there's this conception that you were always going to do it that way, but actually you did it that way out of necessity. You may have tried to do it another way.
Right. Yeah.
Like I talk about this with regard to like multiple co-founders. So I'm actually glad I solo founded my particular brand for a variety of reasons. I sort of look at it as like a benevolent dictatorship type deal. And I think it's helped us move fast in many ways. But I actually wanted a co-founder. The only reason I solo founded it was because I couldn't convince someone else to found it with me. Meanwhile, I'm like, everyone's like, oh, like, how did you know to do that? And it's like, no, I didn't. I just couldn't get the outcome that I actually wanted. And so I did it this other way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was trying to get some sort of seed round to get the thing going in some, respectable way, but just didn't happen. I think like you end up learning how to fight a bear with a stick, making something out of nothing because you had nothing. And then you realize, oh shit, that mentality is now going to let me run laps around people who only know how to fight a bear with a high-powered rifle and stuff. And then you pick up the rifles and the bazookas and everything as you're growing a profitable company. But, that mentality that you came up with ends up being like a distinct differentiator. And it was not like you set out to have that mentality,
Like dovetailing with what I was saying earlier on the founder versus co-founder thing, I think actually all three of us have different permutations of ways to found a company. And then you guys are 4-man deal. Is that right? Sean, it's you, Brian, Ryan, and Jeff. Are those the 4?
Yep. Yeah. So it was kind of maybe similar to Joe's story. Like it was like, hey, here's the crew and here's, what we envision different people doing. But obviously when you're not making any money, you're really one person. I couldn't even technically afford to quit my job, but I did. I kind of got the company going, started figuring some things out. The other guys are, hustling on their 9 to 5 and then Dude Wipes. And then, yeah, as the journey starts to unfold, we're able to bring people in out of the matrix. You know what I mean? Like, okay, we got, we made $500,000 in a year. Like, let's bring another guy in and stuff like that. So, yeah, everybody was contributing as much as they could on the side, but the goal was obviously like, let's just get this thing growing. The first goal was for everyone to be employed by Dude Wipes, kind of as simple as that is. And, that resulted in like, let's just find a channel that we could make a couple $1,000,000 in. So we got a couple jobs,
It's funny, as you were talking about this, I think about the first chat we had. Our episode 1 was with Preston Rutherford, one of the founders of Chubbies. And I asked him, I was like, how did you work out all the kinks of the co-founder thing? Because someone's going to care more. Someone's going to do more work. Co-founder infighting is like maybe number 1 on what takes down startups. And he was basically like, dude, I wasn't thinking about any of that. Our first thought was basically what you just said. How do we just replace our salaries? How do we we're all friends. We want to work together. I'd rather work with you guys than like my boss at whatever other corporate gig. And so we were just focused on that. And then everything else like worked itself out. Was it similar for you guys, or were you a lot more like intentional about division of labor and things like that?
I mean, intentional about division of labor, but yeah, that was the number one goal, is to have an actual running company with your buddies. And that really took 2 to 3 years, even to get to that point, where like that was working in some respect. And then it was like, how do we make $10 million? How do we get into this retailer, But at first it is about that. I think the simplest thing I tell people when they're, getting together with people they want to start a company is just look for those complementary skills. I would say that was the only thing we were, intentional or forward looking about. We didn't need a bunch of finance guys or a bunch of creatives or a bunch of sales guys. It had to be balanced and you had to be into like wanting to do your own thing. There's a lot of people like that, but just go out and try and balance yourself out.
Well, I was going to ask a question about like your brand essence, right? I think I can relate to where you guys came from in one way. When we were early on at Rocketbook, we just came up with this sort of absurdist branding because we needed to get people's attention, but we didn't have any budget. So we, come up with silly skits and wear astronaut outfits and talk to people in maybe bro-y ways, even though we were selling to everybody, but we were just a couple dudes, right? And that then that eventually just became our brand and became a thing that helped to propel us. And I'm putting that out there because I'm wondering, like, how did yours evolve? Does that resonate with you? Is it similar? Or how? I mean, now Dude Wipes, does $150 million in revenue, but back when you were small, like, how did you think about the brand you were building? Did you think that you'd get this big, or were you just trying to like do something interesting and get noticed and get a paycheck? Like, how did that play out for you?
Yeah, I mean, from the brand side, we were brand first. So it was like there was visuals of the brand and copy of the brand way before there was the wipe, like that this brand was going to kind of not be exactly what it is today, but it's probably softened some. But it was going to, like you said, get attention, be different, be real, actually talk to people the way they would talk to their buddies at the bar. And like, it was kind of that simple, like build something we would like ourselves. So yeah, we were always like very heavy on the brand. And in terms of the vision, we were delusional, I guess, or correct with that it could be very big. So, I mean, I got receipts of pitch decks being like, we'll get to 100 million, but I was saying in like 5 years, So we actually thought this thing was so sweet and so original and like there was such juice in it that it was going to take off like a bat out of hell and that we were going to be, the next big brand. And so we were right. But it took a hell of a lot longer than we thought. There was always the big picture belief. This is something we can achieve. This is out there for us to take. Oddly enough, that was always part of the plan.
It's wild how consistent the 5/10 year thing is. Everyone hears that, it takes 10 years to build a brand. Everyone thinks, no, I'm special. I'm going to do it in 5.
Right.
And then the people who make it do it in 10. Like, it's remarkable how consistent, because I had the same experience where I was like, I'll do it in 5. And it just never, ever pans out that. I mean, in freakishly good situations, it does, but it's just so rare that it might as well not, never happen.
Yeah, for sure.
On the bootstrapping thing, like, it was out of necessity. You guys got the ball rolling. You did 10 or 20 or 30K that first partial year. And then I think you did 100K or 120K your second year. But then I imagine in year 3, maybe things started taking off to where you could turn back to those initial people that you pitch, those investors, and say, well, actually, now I definitively have something here. And you probably could have raised money, but you didn't do that. Was the reason you didn't do that because of Shark Tank and you got linked up with Cuban and you kind of like rode that horse and then you just became so net profitable that you could survive off of operating cash flows? Or were you by that point so bought into the, low capital raised mentality that you had just fundamentally shifted how you looked at the business?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously then we do deal with Cuban in 2015. So that's like 3 years in, a seed round on Shark Tank. We close the deal, the whole thing. So for the next year or two, we're just like growing. It's not like we have a ton of money, but we're not like convinced we need to kind of go out and raise or anything either. Like things are going well. I would say it was more as we were starting, and we did $1.5 million the year that we did a deal with Mark. But we were, we had never broken $1 million before and any of that. It was kind of when you were creeping to like that $10 million mark, and then the VCs are hitting you up and like, hey, we could do an investment in this company. And you're like, okay, we've never had a couple $1 million of, primary capital come into this thing. What could we do? And Mark gave us some good advice there, because I will say Mark's advice is for his Shark Tank companies, like pro entrepreneur, just like, what would I do if I was in your shoes? He doesn't really care when you're selling or any of that stuff, because, he's got enough money. And he was like, well, if it's working for you, why would you go and sell equity again? If what you're doing is working, profitable, what would you do with the money? And a lot of it was like things we didn't know, like, well, we want to figure out this size of the market or, this R&D thing. And he was like, well, you have cash. Why don't you just hire consultants to do that? So we kind of got from that little point with Mark, we started throwing like 6 figures at consultants to solve different problems that, who are we? We don't know anything.
What would be an example of like 1 or 2 of those problems that you help solve?
Understanding what's going on in our category with like the Nielsen data and like what size player are we and like how are the other guys doing and what does the next couple years look like? Just someone to like dig into that and do like a category management like project for us, because we were just pulling our levers, doing everything to operate and grow the company. And we actually did end up hiring that lady 3-4 years down the line. She works for us full time now. But at first she was a consultant that we found to solve something we didn't know. Then like CPG consultants on, channel strategy and stuff like that. And that served us well, because now we're just like every year we're like, who's the best mind in what we're trying to solve? Boom, let's go hire them, as a consultant. And now we'll hire people too. Obviously we've graduated to that standpoint. But we can get expert advice from someone who just, has been doing this for 30 years in one particular vertical, and they're now consulting, and you do a little project. So that was kind of our unlock. And that's what the VCs and the PE guys bring, right? Like they're hiring the same people. They're running their fund. They're not like, if they're trying to solve a problem, they're bringing you into their network and stuff. And so we started hiring people that are like working with the same people who want to bring that expertise to you.
I think there's a little bit of difference in opinion between Will and Sean here. Will, I think you make a big point not to hire anybody who's worked in CPG before, right? I mean, Sean, do you guys think differently about this?
Not so much make a point of it. That just kind of is how it shook out. We've had people work for us who were like tenured or veterans or whatever you want to call it, and none of them worked out. And I think a big reason they didn't work out was because of that. Like I think there's a couple of things. There's like the ego piece, right? So because I'm tenured, because I've done it for 10 years or 20 years, the way I do it is like attached to how competent I am as a human. And that circle does not square with the way startups do things. And it's like, no, actually, you need to, even though you have that experience, you need to throw 90% of that out because we do it very, very differently at a much smaller scale. We're much scrappier. We have much fewer resources. And just any context of any kind is different. And so you're going to have to map to our category, branding, voice, etc. Like I'm obsessed with this idea of just like athletes, like mental athletes, people who can just pick stuff up really quickly, adapt, etc. And so, we have a very small team like you guys, and everyone's just an athlete and has learned CPG and their subcomponent of CPG. Yeah, I would be curious to hear how you think about all that.
I mean, on the consultant end, I don't have as much of that concern. I agree with you, I think, for the most part on like the employee end, but the consultant is like, they can tell me things wrong that I disagree with. They can tell me things right. Like they're just supposed to find a couple things and we'll absorb it and understand what we want to implement. And that experience, can be very helpful there, but you're not trying to get them to adapt to your culture or, be a player at your company for the next 5 years sort of deal. And then, a lot of our people have come from CPG, most of them like smaller, but bigger than us. So like, we got some people when we were hiring from RX Bar and it was like, okay, we're 50 million. We want to figure out how to get to 250. Like, I'm going to hire you to run my operations because you came from a culture with startup mentality, but you had bigger scale. And so those are like better culture fits than PepsiCo, try and bring in a head of operations from PepsiCo. And they're like, well, I had 20 people underneath me. And like, there's going to be culture shock. So if we do look at anybody from large CPG, usually they're younger and maybe they've had, 3 years experience there and we're looking for them to do something, or we really like vet out the culture part. Cause it is a shock to come from Fortune 500 into, 20 dudes figuring things out kind of world.
For starters, what is your culture? How do you view your culture and has your culture kind of professionalized? Like at first it was a bunch of dudes in a room and now it's like, okay, guys, we actually have to have a concrete culture. And then how do you hire for that?
Yeah, I mean, the values that we put down in 2013 are our same values. So it's definitely professionalized, but like the way that we go about things, like making sure, have fun, work hard, be a good dude, like that's like non-negotiable. Like if you're not going to have fun here, if you're not going to work hard and you're not going to like be supportive of each other, like you'll be out. We hire and fire by our values. Things like if you ain't first, you're last. Like we're trying to do things differently. We're not trying to do copycat Me Too things. The dudeness is the magic. We're, our dudeness, our creative spirit, it's the only thing people can't take away from us. So like we have a set of values and you're trying to vet people out that they will like fit those values, fit at your company. You don't always, you're never going to shoot 100%, or sometimes someone just grows and, needs to move on to another business opportunity. But yeah, being intentional about your values, who you are, and like asking people like, hey, are you going to be comfortable having to wear multiple hats and, being at a company of our size and how do you handle these situations? So we're EQ over IQ guys, just looking for emotionally intelligent, good people who are like willing to learn versus like the smartest person on my resume list. If that person doesn't seem like they'd be a good person to work with, like we're not going to take them based on their skills.
Seems like you guys have really strong word of mouth, or you noticed that right from the beginning. I'm curious, like, have you thought hard about how you amplify word of mouth? how you spend on existing customers who could create word of mouth versus new, exposure to new customers for your brand? How do you think about like investing in word of mouth and doubling down on what's already working for you?
Yeah, I mean, word of mouth is the best, right? Best marketing out there. I think most people will agree with that. And so how do you achieve it? In the beginning, there was really no other choice but word of mouth. So we would ship like dude wipes to frat houses and, let the dudes pass them around and like get some banter going and they would hand out wipes and like, people would just talk about it. So that's what we did for a long time, was just get product into people's hands, let them talk about it. Then we started learning like some viral, like newsjacking, hacking sort of stuff that really, with our brand, helped amplify word of mouth. Our first famous one was putting dude wipes on the back of a UFC fighter's trunks. 2014, we're on Tyron Woodley's ass, long before the Jake Paul fights, where we come back to him, 8 years later. But yeah, we trended, on Twitter worldwide. Everyone was talking about dude wipes on this guy's ass. How funny is that? How perfect is that? What are dude wipes? So always trying to put ourselves out there in fun ways that will then social media, the news will like pick it up and talk about it. So like looking for those lightning strike moments, moving quick on them. I think product is probably an under talked about word of mouth thing. Like the more quality your product is, that has nothing to do with marketing. The more people are going to talk about it. Like, man, it's a really great wipe, and having a name that is fun and people want to talk about, like, helps amplify it. But if the product isn't good, just because the name is cool, people aren't going to talk about it. So really being, hell-bent on having quality that gets people to talk about your product too is super important, I think.
Virality and word of mouth do seem to dovetail pretty closely. And in watching past interviews of you, I was going through all of the cases, the Tyler and Woodley thing, the Rob Dyrdek thing, Shark Tank in and of itself achieved some level of virality, the UFC fighter who shat herself, the pitcher who shat himself.
Yeah, a lot of sharks out there,
Yeah, a lot of sharks. You were on every major shark incidents. You've also unlocked other aspects of virality. So LTOs, limited time offers, and product development, the Dumpkin Spice thing.
Yeah.
That achieved virality, and that was not newsjacking. You made the news. You created the news.
Wait, can you say what that was? I'm curious.
Pumpkin Spice was our limited time drop in the fall last year of a pumpkin spice scented dude wipe, and yeah, just did what we thought it would do. We had good vibes about things where we're like, hey, we're pretty sure this is going to work, but you don't know till it's out there. And yeah, that's just something you'd want to talk about. You'd want to post on your TikTok. You'd want to have fun with, and that is word of mouth, like getting people talking. And I think that's the best to me, Will. If you can get your product involved, like marketing your brand involved in word of mouth is awesome too. I just saw something the other day about Cybertruck and word of mouth. Like that's the same thing. Like you hate it, you love it, looks so funky, whatever. But Elon launched this car that is just ridiculous for word of mouth.
Product and category in and of itself, like it doesn't matter how elevated you are cognitively. Like poop jokes are just funny. It doesn't matter what age you're at either. It's just funny. It's an involuntary reaction where you're like, that's funny. That strikes a chord. Way more so than, let's say, protein bars, right? Like that's just not a funny category. You play in a category that is inherently conducive to virality, which I'm jealous of.
Yeah. But we were the first people to ever make it fun.
Totally. You need to unlock that.
That was like our other aha moment. Like that was kind of the idea. But again, we were such rookies. Like we didn't really appreciate how powerful that idea really was. Like there's this thing of shitting and poop humor and wiping your ass. And there's this massive toilet paper industry. And no one's even said the word butt yet.
And not only that, they do the opposite.
We're seeing them having to loosen up a little bit. But we were doing this for years and years before anybody even would acknowledge that the fun thing that we were doing was like an angle, you know?
Charmin does the opposite, right? They're like, oh, we don't want to show humans. Let's show a bear because that's like we're making it lighter and like we're not actually ever going to show the butt or poop or anything like that. You know, they go like, not only do they sort of make it blander, they go like the opposite direction.
Mommy marketing kind of deal, because that's who's buying a lot of their product. But I think people don't appreciate moms are fun. You know, they don't want to be talked like this bland bullshit. You know what I mean? And so now, while the Charmin Bear strategy is probably great for them, like it's iconic, it's recognizable, it's not something they ever want to change, but we can go the other direction. I heard another good thing recently about your brand being a moat. Your brand is only a moat if you can say things that the other people can't. If what you're saying is something that the other big guy can say, what the fuck moat are you talking about? But we have this moat where we can say and act the way that they can't, and they can loosen up a little bit, but they're not interested in like jumping on the other side either. And I don't think necessarily they should be. There's kind of a balance to what they do, but we have to be like on our side, you know?
So it sounds like to me that even if you never change your product at all, you still have an endless need to come up with new ideas on the marketing side. I mean, there's just this open playing field for how you could talk about butts and butt wiping and get your message out there in clever and interesting ways. Like, do you guys have just like a couple dudes there who are really good with coming up with these ideas? Or are you creating like a culture where most people, you know, feel empowered and expected to come up with cool ideas, right? To fill that funnel of interesting marketing ideas.
Yeah, I mean, the actual marketing team is small, which, you know, I think is a lot of times good for creativity, like that the team is small, executing and running this stuff, but ideas can come from anywhere. So, you know, we have a wild ass ideas session at our company where, you know, someone from accounting can be like, well, why aren't we doing this on TikTok? You know, so like an idea can come from anywhere, but then it just goes to like the smaller group. It's like, is that a good idea? How do we try that? How do we test that? Because they're just like so intimate. So like all this newsjacking stuff, there's a text box of like 4 people, you know, and it's like, oh, this is going on. Boom, you know, tell the warehouse to get that out, you know. And then we do have marketing agency as well. And they can bring good ideas in, but a lot of that is helping out execution. So our people can be more like idea generation and remove, you know, some of the big laborious like execution that can come with bigger marketing budgets.
You mentioned gender, just with the moms are fun too thing. I know you've sort of androgenized, if that's a word, this concept of dude, right? I'm sure at first it was like, oh, we're all dudes, we're all men, we're living in an apartment, we're eating burritos and taking gnarly dumps.
Yeah, yeah.
Then over time, it's like, okay, what is dude? And women can be dudes too. But to some extent, the word is the word and people have like certain connotations with it. And then there's like that dynamic that we sort of lightly touched on, which is women do most of the shopping. It just is what it is. I think it's something like 80% of CPG shoppers or 80% of CPG just like revenue dollars are attributable to a woman buying stuff.
Yeah, that's all right.
I think some people would paint that as a weakness, and then I'm sure you view it as a strength. But how do you just like think about gender in general for your brand, and what are the implications of that?
As we've grown, we just started noticing women were buying a lot of this product, especially once we got into retail. So we're like, okay, makes sense. You know, we have like let's say the category is like 80% women buying, we'll be like 70. So we're bringing incrementality and we're getting the men involved in buying a category. So that's good for everybody. And then we found the usage is 50-50 on some big surveys. So once it gets in the house, everybody's kind of using the dude wipes, from like the little girl potty training to mom to, you know, brother in high school. Like all of these things are happening, and that maybe surprised us, right? Like, but then you start learning a little bit more about how brands work, and it's sort of a paradox of all paradoxes. Like if you stay focused to who you are, everybody wants in. So like, because it works so well for these dudes who take big nasty shits and stuff, gotta work. It's gotta work good enough for me. And that's fun. And, you know, it's part of the tone of the brand, being approachable to a lot of people. But if you try and loosen things up too much, you actually like lose that paradox. And I think that's where a lot of people make a mistake, the everything to everyone, not realizing it works better on the male to female. Like there's a famous thing at BIC. The women will buy the black razors. They'll buy them in droves from BIC. The men will not buy the pink ones. And I'm not going to try and figure that out or know like why that's the way, you know, dudes work, but that is a thing. We just believe our positioning is so strong and that it is approachable to so many people that we have to keep that balance of not watering it down or doing anything crazy unless the customer, the market is eventually telling us something. So I never act like I know what's going to happen in 5 years or what perception is, because your brand isn't what you say it is. It's what they say it is. And so we're always listening, like, what are people saying this brand is? And how do we kind of, you know, craft it? But we've kind of taken the stance of doubling down on who we are, and continues to work. But it's, you know, we learn more things every year about it.
There's also the dynamic of women buying for men. I'm sure that's a massive dynamic for you too, to where, yeah, it is a female shopper. Sometimes she's buying it for herself, but oftentimes she's buying it for her husband.
And we define the dude internally and like externally as someone who doesn't take life too seriously, positive attitude. Like you have to kind of have that like fun, willing to go with the whole dude thing, but that's really it. And not everybody has that. Some people want something a little bit more conservative or watered down or whatever. And like, that's fine. But we're just kind of like, if you like the goofy stuff that we're up to and like the way we approach life, like come in, have fun with our brand.
How do you think about brand enemy as just like a concept? That was another theme that I found just in listening to you in prior talks you've done. First of all, what is your enemy? Because it sounds like you do, and I agree. I think it's useful to have a juxtaposition point for your brand. So for you, it seems like toilet paper is like writ large. That is the enemy. We want to conquer that. I think you're at 1% of market share of ways people wipe their ass, and they're at 99%. So if you can get to 2-3%, you're starting to chip away at it. But then also there are other wet wipe companies. There's Cottonelle, which is Kimberly-Clark. There's Charmin, which is P&G, Good Wipes. There's also private label, right? Like that's going to be is a thing and will be a thing to some degree. So is that also the enemy? Like how do you view all of those things with regard to like enemy?
The toilet paper thing is useful for the consumer because like you're trying to move somebody from something to something else. If you can frame old guard stinks, it's bad, you need to evolve, you need to come over to the new thing. It helps people just conceptualize like, oh yeah, that's old, that's not good. This is new, this is better. So that's where in marketing, like the enemy or the juxtaposition is good, or like, you know, the gas guzzling cars are, you know, hurting the environment, move to the EV, like that just helps people grasp why they need to move to the new solution. So from a marketing perspective, consumer perspective, like that's a beautiful way to frame it up in a subcategory. Toilet paper, you know, you have dry and wet, you know, so what we do is like this wet subcategory. That thing should just continue to keep growing. So you wouldn't be well positioned to like say, oh, our wipe is better than this wipe or that wipe. That's when you get into like dog fight category stage, beef jerky or something. You know what I mean? Like everybody who's eating beef jerky is pretty much enjoying it, and it's got like whatever penetration. And now you're like, we're the better one, or we're this one, or we're dry aged, we're that. And you have to start doing that, you know, dog fight stuff. For us, that wouldn't make sense as a strategy based on the upsize of the from to, you know, from the dry to the wet.
Well, speaking of brands, I'm kind of curious, you know, your brand is doing a lot of work and it's powerful and scalable. You also seem to do a lot on the personal branding side. And so how do you justify spending, a substantial amount of time on LinkedIn and other ways. What's your thought process there?
When you're running a brand and, been running Dude Wipe social medias for like a long time too, not that I'm still running them, but like I'm good at that, right? So it's not that much of a time suck for me to be involved in a couple platforms and give updates, on the brand. And obviously, the ROI is unquantifiable, but like, oh, I saw you post this big update on LinkedIn. You get one retailer message or sort of the people I've met who I've hired or culture, like, oh, I know exactly what that company's about because that CEO is very open about their culture. And so it helps like weed out people before they even step foot in an interview. Like, so it does all of these things that are great for the business. And then also it provides you something that you have in perpetuity for a long time to continue to grow.
The small business review would be an example of ways you also use it to give back or reinvest into the ecosystem. I imagine that's how you've met a zillion cool people that way too.
Yeah. And I meet entrepreneurs and they're doing something interesting. And like I review their product and then like 2-3 years later, like they're on Shark Tank and they're, getting into this retailer and see like you can learn from those people, right? Like, because they're scrappy and they're doing things that maybe you forgot about. So I like supporting those people and like giving them advice if they ask, if I can. We were in an incubator when we first started in Austin, Texas. It's now called SKU. So now it's grown into a bunch of different ones, but it was like one of their very early on ones. And like guys like Clayton Christopher, from Sweet Leaf Tea and Deep Eddy Vodka were part of the incubator. And it was, hey, like we didn't end up getting anybody to invest in us through there, but it ended up just being a ridiculous learning experience with all these people, having done much bigger things, giving you advice. And now I can clearly see that. I talked to some entrepreneur who's very early and they're just focused on the wrong things. And like, if I can tell you in 5 minutes some stuff you need to stop working on and some stuff you need to focus on, and then I will have people get back to me, listen, not that I'm always right, but, when you're coming from a vantage point, you can kind of see if someone's making a mistake and like, hey, I focused on that. I'm seeing the results. Thank you for that piece of advice, And that goes for just a random post, which I'm sure you guys see as well. Like you put some post out on the ether of your opinion on a subject matter. You didn't realize it went for 70,000 views or whatever. And all of a sudden, random entrepreneur X and Y is like, you said something and I like executed on it and it really helped my business.
So just to switch gears a little bit, your business is so unique and so different relative to a business like mine. We were super capitally efficient, but definitely took on money. We've raised just under 10 million to date. In so doing that, you're building to sell. You just are. I mean, the edge case would be you're building to spit out a ton of cash flow. I can't think of many, if any, cases where that like actually played out that way. So that's the seat I'm in. And I'm sober about that. You're in a very different seat, right? The only money you took was from Mark Cuban. He's a billionaire. He doesn't need the return. He has an infinitely long time horizon that he's cool with. And then also, you actually can build a really big business that spits out a ton of EBITDA. So you are one of the edge cases, the rare cases to where, I mean, you guys can get rich off of distributions. It just is what it is.
Right.
Also, you've made certain decisions I wouldn't make, and we had a back and forth on this on the ERP side. That would be like a great example. That can be an incredibly good, smart, prudent decision to make if you have in your mind a time horizon of, I'm going to keep building this for another 10 years, and this is the right thing to do. It's going to suck for a year, but we're building for the long haul, and it's the right move. Whereas I might say, hell no, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm building this to sell. The acquirer will worry about that. How do you think about time horizon? And then, do you want to sell? Are you building it to sell? Are you building it to cash flow because you can? Like, can you just speak to all that?
There's some paradoxes to it. Like, Cuban is famous saying, like, if you have an exit plan, like, you don't have a business. And like, obviously there's a punchiness to that is not 100% realistic, but there's a truth to it that's like I'm always a realist. Like my customer doesn't want me to sell this company. I would want like a reason to partner with somebody, like trying to go international. And we think we can get this to 3 billion. It's just like this platform, big strategic, has something that can, buy us a lot of time on that and help us execute that. Like the ERP decision, it goes back to, we always say, build it like you're going to give it to your grandkids. That's how we make decisions. And if someone swoops in tomorrow and is like, I want to give you a ridiculous multiple for this business and buy the whole thing from you today, like, of course, we're going to take that phone call and be responsible to ourselves, to our shareholders, all of those things. But we have to remind ourselves of this a lot. The minute we start making decisions so that phone call comes in better, actually, the less of a good business I think we're building. It's back to that, like staying true to the dude or whatever, like staying true to building this for the long term actually gives you something more sellable in the short term. So like the ERP, like I think someone's going to say, well, that's great you have an ERP because I'm going to have to put that in or whatever. Like they want less problems. They want a bigger build out structure. And it's okay if you've made prioritizations. I'm not saying that's a bad decision. Just be prepared. People are going to hold things against you. And Joe, I'm sure you have experience. People are going to try and nickel and dime you when they're actually putting the money on the table. And so we always want to be in a position where we have optionality and have leverage. And like you said, not everyone's in that position, but that's where some of those, if I did have earlier investors and they wanted out and I'm still having fun and I want to grow, I wouldn't let that force me out. I would be looking for ways to flip them and reset the horizon,
To me, that would be wild if everyone felt exactly that way. Just because people are weird and people evolve differently, and some people have kids over here and other people don't have kids, and some people get married and some people get divorced. And it's just like so much happens in, let's say, 4 people's lives over 11 years or whatever it's been. Like there has to be some disagreement of some kind around where the people want to go personally as it relates to the business, and then like where they want the business to go too.
Well, and then the other nice thing about that is you can, if somebody legitimately, a legitimate stakeholder was like, hey, I'm out, I'm not in for this long run, you can find investors to buy their stock at a decent valuation too. So that's optionality. I wouldn't want anybody to feel stuck or golden handcuffed. It's like, hey, I just had 2 kids. I don't want to work for Dude Wipes anymore. These days there's so much PE money out there. People will just buy secondary shares. People will be like, if Mark Cuban wanted out, I could find somebody to buy him out. That's another way to get past those, if you had serious differences on horizons.
When it comes to acquisition offers, are you getting inbound? Are you more on the radar of either large strategic CPG companies, private equity, et cetera, because you're personally out there a lot?
It definitely has a benefit from the fact they know how your business is doing because you're public about the numbers. Unless they don't believe me, which I'm sure some of them don't, that stuff is out there. And so that creates a little froth. Like you're not like back channeling all these things. It's just like, oh, these guys are killing it in the category. And so that results in a lot of people looking to invest. I would say acquire is like a whole different level of interest versus like, hey, are you guys looking for, I'd be willing to buy 30% of your company. Are you looking to reset the cap table? Like there's a lot of that out there versus like, I'm looking to acquire this brand. Of course, that helps us get on the radar, but those big guys, they want really big brands too.
There's definitely been this movement going up market for acquirers in food and bev. I mean, you're small until you're doing at least 75 million. And that just was not the case in, let's say, 2018. Businesses were trading to Pepsi and they were only doing $25 million a year, right? And now there's no shot Pepsi's ever taken a look at that brand unless has some technological thing that they can apply to 10 other business units or what have you. It's just not happening.
You know what I've heard some of the big boys have learned is how bad they are at bringing on a brand that small. To integrate it to the mothership, they just stink at it. You know what I mean? Like they move really big, chunky things They would rather see PE come in, get a chunk, professionalize it, get it to 100 million, get it to 200 million. Now they're like, okay, that's a piece we can just drop in easier, trading faster and lower. I think they learned some things about, themselves.
Yeah, and they think about it in terms of top and bottom line too, right? It never made sense from a top and bottom line standpoint. It's not even moving 1/10 of one decimal point on either the top or the bottom line.
Yeah.
In fact, it's worsening the bottom. Like in that era where it was go, 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 it was actually worsening the bottom line because the company was losing money, sometimes a lot of money. So it was never, but it was just like, I don't know. It's funny. And looking back, I actually don't know what many of them were thinking for the poor fundamental startups that were bought. But yeah, all of them failed, or let's say 90% failed. And then even ones that like succeeded, take Honest Tea, right? Coca-Cola bought Honest Tea. That was succeeding. That was an EBITDA positive business. It got to be really big. And then Coke discontinued it anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Even the success stories that had good business fundamentals still didn't make it in many cases.
But what's an alternative explanation? Is it a defensive play just to buy these brands that may encroach on their shelf space? Like what? I'm naive. Explain it to me.
I mean, I think certain categories do get defensive. Like, hey, I'm Coca-Cola and I'm sick of what Olipop's doing, and they are beating up this whole sugar thing, this whole pop thing, and they're taking my consumers and like, let me go buy them and like control that message from now on and continue to grow it. Hopefully it's profitable, but being so big, not having a problem getting rid of it at some point. Now they want to follow the consumers too. And so I think some of it comes down to like, this is a real category. It's going to be here for 20 years. We need a play in it. So I think it's defensive and like emerging new categories. They really get, I think, extra interested in,
Focus is a theme that I found to be common amongst, topics you like to talk about. And I know you've talked about some misadventures into platformizing or moving to other categories and things like that. Me personally, I've tried to platformize our brand from to not just doing bars, but also hydration and coffee. And then there's also these sort of external events, black swan events. COVID happened and your demand 3x, let's say, for flushable wipes. And it sounds like you thought this is silly to focus anywhere else. Like, why are we not doubling down on this? And also, like, how has your thinking evolved? Because even though there were misadventures, I know you've talked about we want to own the toilet and like the toilet space. And you have the scent bombs or whatever you put in, and
the dude bombs.
Yeah.
I take them or leave them, the dude bombs, right? You still want to like have a little bit of experimentation or, fun things happening, but the main motivation for focus and I hear your point too, that you brought up on it, like about your category and if you can build a hero brand in there, how much juice is in there, like those things matter. Obviously, we made mistakes in a category that we had no business doing anything else, and we realized those mistakes. Probably my biggest like aha moments was more about consumer mind share too, and branding, the Al Ries, Jack Trout stuff, 22 immutable laws of marketing, and like everything that they've written is grounded in history. And basically, people will only associate your brand typically with one thing. And it's just how our brains work. And so I believe I'm naive to think you will associate dude with anything besides like my ass wipes. Oh, I'll also do deodorant. So there's these capital energy reasons not to do it. But then there's just the straight up consumer, like they want to buy Coca-Cola for their soda and Coca-Cola Energy didn't work. They want to buy Red Bull for their energy and Red Bull Cola didn't work. And these are brands where it's like, that makes perfect sense, right? Like those are close synergies, but they're way better off growing Red Bull in energy and figuring out different ways to deliver that proposition, a shot of this, of that, So typically most people have so much white space ahead of them in their category that if they focus, they'll innovate more in it. They'll create more brand value in it. And then people more will associate the brand with that. Like Kleenex doesn't make, they actually are trying to make paper towels in Europe. You know what I mean? So you see these things going on, but like Kleenex doesn't make paper towels in the US. It's Kleenex and it's facial tissue and it's with aloe and witch hazel and this and mini sizes, travel sizes, big sizes. So like I subscribe, especially if you have the opportunity, to the category king mindset. I think the biggest thing is what we did, like people experiment way too early because we're entrepreneurs and we all have ideas and you're impatient about the growth of this thing that you're seeing in the first 3 to 5 years. We hadn't even made our first 10 million yet in flushable butt wipes before we thought we needed to do other things. And here I am at 150 saying no to other things. And again, in 5 years, am I saying yes to other different things because I figured out, different points of the journey? Potentially. Especially once you figure out how to create something and sell it online.
And the online-ness makes it so freaking easy to spin something else up, especially if you have like a D2C presence. Well, it's like, oh, well, I want to build my basket. I want the average order value to be $70 instead of $20. And I know you're only going to buy so many protein bars. So now if you buy something non-cannibalizing in addition to that, that helps me.
And D2C only, I like that more. Like if you're strictly a D2C business and it's about the club and the basket, but then when you start going omni-channel, should I just be focused on building this brand in this category, omni, and are these little things I'm doing on D2C, am I sacrificing capital and energy and mind share to do them,
Can you even name any D2C brand that got to the promised land in the 2020s from D2C alone? I can't. And so you had to go omni-channel. Once you go omni-channel, you learn how much of your business is going to accrue to brick and mortar.
Yeah.
And then it just sort of becomes clear, like, okay, yeah, we can do these other things in a D2C context or an Amazon context as well.
Right.
This ain't going to fly in brick and mortar. And it just so happens that brick and mortar is now like half, and then now it's 60% of my business. Now it's 70%.
That's a good point. I also, as our business started becoming more omni, more of these things started to become clear to me because you realize the opportunity. And then I'm like trying to chase down the Walmart deodorant buyer and like get on his line review schedule and stuff like that. Like it starts to become a whole thing to execute omni in multiple categories.
All right, do we get into the rapid fire? What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, let's get into rapid fire.
Love a good rapid fire round.
All right, the first one may be a thinker here. So it's the classic Peter Thiel question. What important truth do you believe that few people really agree with you on?
Probably this category king focus thing. I think a lot of people are like, well, no, why wouldn't they do that? That makes sense. That's smart. And I never want to be dogmatic about it because I always want to have an open mind about things. But yeah, I think that's one thing a lot of people have a hard time thinking that singular focus is the best outcome.
I think one thing, you're so right that it's like entrepreneurs struggle with it because they don't find focus fun. Like focus is inherently not fun.
Yeah.
But if you focus and do the same thing, habituation takes root, and habituation is not fun. And it's really not fun for an entrepreneur who's like ADD and like wants to be like trying 10 different things.
Yeah. And it's like the ultimate dopamine hit is like finding product market fit. Once you've done that once, you kind of get addicted to the idea of doing that.
You got to keep it fresh, which for us, it's about being the most innovative at what we do. I will entertain any wild ass idea if it falls into the constraints. And I have to be Mr. No on a lot of things, but like now people kind of know, well, if it falls in this constraint, I can ask for $100,000 to go try some new dude wipes thing. And, Sean will probably say yes, because like that's where we want to fail. And so that's one thing we've learned, like the Dumpkin and what's next, and like just do more things like that, succeed, fail, but like, yeah, still got to be innovative. It's the trick.
All right, second question. What are commonly cited platitudes about what it takes for a startup to win that are just plain wrong? Like what does the old guard or what do the experts or what do the veterans say that you just think is totally not true?
Money. And they said that to us on Shark Tank. Oh, you're never going to have enough money to build this category and build this marketing. And, you're going to need way more money than that. And, I've heard that all along the way. You need money to get going. You need money to solve problems. You need money to market. You don't need money for any of those things. You need some amount of money to get going. Usually not as much as people think if you're willing to do it out of the trunk of your car on your first, batch. And then it doesn't solve your problems as things open up. Creativity does.
Next one. What do people dislike about you?
Probably like that I speak my mind on topics sometimes. And not everybody likes an unfiltered person who puts a lot of things out there. You're going to get the hate with the love. I know it's not for everybody, but not worried about it.
All right. What's been your biggest mistake or regret over the last 11 years or so?
I would have focused on online business way earlier in the journey. I moved pretty slow those first 3 years from kind of thinking that the product could be in Walgreens and, trying to call up wholesalers and thinking, this thing was ready for stores and ready for prime time. And it wasn't until I kind of got over that and then just solely focused online for a couple years that then everything else opened up. Just that one insight of focusing on one channel would have bought me a couple years.
Now, wait a minute. Would either of you guys or have either of you guys ever said no to, a major channel or a major retailer for some strategic reasons? I don't think I said no to some small ones because they were too small. But have you guys ever done that to a big guy?
We have on drug, and that was after having a lot of trouble there early on when we were always saying yes, and then came back on later on and we're just like, not right now. We're focused on other channels. Yeah, not a ton.
Exact same thing. Our first retailer was CVS. And then you're like, oh, we're moving 0.2 units per SKU per store per week, and we have a perishable product. And then we learned you can make it work. So people can get too dogmatic that pick a strategy, only do that strategy and never be opportunistic. And then obviously the flip side is not good either. I think it's somewhere in between.
I agree. Walmart was a place, according to everybody, we got in way too early and we were just like, well, hell, we can get into Walmart. We're going to give it a shot. And that was a really good opportunistic decision.
What was the single hardest decision you had to make along the way?
Probably quitting my job. In the beginning, I feel like that's your real cord cutter entrepreneur moment and everything opens up from there. You don't really know what's on the other side and you haven't done it before. And there's all these reasons not to do it. And you end up making that decision anyways. So I always say the first million's the hardest. And yeah, that's one of the first hardest decisions you'll have to make too.
How did you define success, quote unquote, pre-startup, and how do you define it today? How is your conception of what it's like to live a successful life, run a successful business? How has that evolved?
Success when you're starting is about the money, about getting this company off the ground and having a job and all of that, which is important, especially in the beginning. But then as money turns into money, and, you see growth and you've proved that stuff out. For me, it's all about having fun. So that's where I say when I stop having fun with it, I'm done with it because it doesn't really matter at any point. If it's not fun to me, it's not worth it. It's a big part of your life. You have to make a lot of sacrifices. If this isn't a fun part of it and feeds everything else I'm doing with family and friends and health and everything, then there's other things you could do. So yeah, and not every single part of your day is going to be fun or there's all these challenges and pitfalls and shitty things that happen along the way. But if in macro, it's not fun and making your life better, I always say move on to something else. And before I wouldn't have thought that would be the most important part. It would be well, the business is growing. You have nothing else to worry about, And I'm sure you guys saw that when you took your entrepreneurial journey. You're kind of amazed at how much more fun it is or how much more energy you have, even though it's harder and you're not just doing this little thing and getting your paycheck, but all of a sudden your brain is just much happier, like working on solving your own problem.
Boom.
We did it.
Yeah.
Thank you for the time.
This is great. This is a really fun one, Sean. This is fun.
All right. Talk to you later, man.
All right, that's a wrap. Thanks for listening, and thank you to our sponsors, IQ Bar. Go to Amazon.com, search for IQ Bar, buy one, wait for it to arrive, leave a review. Please leave a review. Reviews are massive. Our second sponsor is Ramp. Go to ramp.com/glass. They give you $250 for free when you sign up. It's the best credit card / spend management software there is. Use it for years. Love it. Our third sponsor is Gorgias, GORGIAS.com. It's the best help desk software there is. We use it too. Also love it. Request a demo and mention Eating Glass. They will give you preferential treatment. They'll treat you well. If you like the podcast in general, subscribe, review it, tell a couple friends, tell your mom, and tune in a couple weeks. Talk to you then.